Hello, I'm Ben Kreitz, your host for this installment of IGS Stand Together on IGS TV. Joining me today is a longtime contributor to both the beef industry and International Genetic Solutions, Dr. Ken Odde. Dr. Odde, thank you for being here to discuss a valuable tool for commercial producers, the IGS Feeder Profit Calculator.
Great to be with you, Ben.
I think maybe a great place to start, though, is could you share what is the Feeder Profit Calculator, or more so, what does it actually predict?
Sure. Be happy to, Ben. And the objective really from the start was to try to quantify true value in feeder cattle. And that's really divided into then two components. One, as they designed this, was the management value, and then the second piece of that is the genetic value.
So how do producers benefit from using the Feeder Profit Calculator?
I think there's several ways. We have producers who are using this as a marketing tool. So they put all the information in on ASA's website, including one of the big pieces to all of this is, of course, the registration numbers for their sires. And also, if they have it, the registration numbers for maternal grandsires, because what we're actually trying to do is we're trying to quantify the genetic value of feeder cattle. That's really primarily what we're trying to do. And we're also interested in the management value because that's a significant piece as well.
I know as we visited in the past, producers being able to find those registration numbers for their herd sires, maybe that they purchased in last year's bull sale, seems to be a bottleneck or one of those challenges. And I'm probably as guilty as anybody of having a stack of sale catalogs in my office. But maybe it's worth keeping track of those sires that are purchased.
Absolutely. I think it is as you described, a bottleneck. And so there's several things we're trying to do to help producers. One of the things we encourage is for seed stock people, if you've got commercial customers that are interested in the Feeder Profit Calculator and you become a source of their registration numbers for the bulls they purchase from you, that has real value. That has real value as they attempt to use the Feeder Profit Calculator. We also have people that use the Feeder Profit Calculator not so much as a marketing tool, but just to quantify value in their calves and actually look at their own breeding programs. And a good example would be if you take the relative genetic value, which is one of the outcomes of the Feeder Profit Calculator. If you actually take that, it's largely a function of if you took an average terminal index on the sires, that's largely what the function actually is. So if you were looking at trying to improve terminal index in your breeding program, if you don't keep replacement heifers, if you sell calves at weaning or you sell them after a backgrounding period, it's a good way to quantify that genetic value in those calves.
Right, and it'd be a totally different suite of EPD traits that we'd be after depending on our marketing goals.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course we talk a lot about the indexes, TI and also then API, and of course for the producers that are really going to keep replacement heifers and want to have a little more of a maternal herd, we'd really recommend they use API with quite a bit of emphasis. If they're more focused on selling calves terminally, we'd recommend they really look at the terminal index.
And you mentioned earlier having that relationship of commercial producers having a relationship with their seed stock providers that might help be able to guide them from a genetic selection ability, help them identify those registration numbers for sires acquired last year. And if a producer is interested in enrolling maybe a set of calves into the Feeder Profit Calculator, what would be the best way for them to do so?
So I would say go to ASA's website and look for Feeder Profit Calculator, and there's a guided process for actually entering the information. Most of the information an average producer will have, most of the time they'll have to go look for their sire registration numbers to make sure that piece is actually in there. And that's, again, as you mentioned earlier, is probably the single biggest hurdle that we actually have. But I'd say people are interested in I've just been talking to maybe in the last month or so, maybe a half a dozen people that are enrolling cattle. And some of them are using it for marketing purposes, and some of them are just trying to understand their own production and what kind of cattle they're producing as well.
And I know we've talked a lot about having the registration of herd sires that are being used, or maybe AI sires even.
Yep.
What other pieces of data is needed to go into the calculator?
So on the management side, the two big pieces that create value on the management side are weaning and vaccination history. So those are the pieces that are most critical on the management side. And then we've kind of talked about what's needed on the genetic side. And then if you need some help, we have people at the Bozeman office that provide some assistance. Sometimes they refer calls to me, and I actually take some of those calls and then walk through it with the producer. In fact, I just did one of those last week, and so and this particular individual was really more interested in understanding his own cow herd better than he actually was in marketing, using it as a marketing tool.
And one of the outputs of the calculator, Dr. Odde, is the total relative value.
Yes.
And what does that represent, or how should a producer interpret that?
Okay, so the total relative value is really the sum of the relative management value and the relative genetic value. And I should mention that we are in the process of updating the economic assumptions in the Feeder Profit Calculator. If you think about the question is what's changed a lot and what's changed more recently, two things. Number one is the price of cattle. So if you look at it in the data that we include in the analysis, it's actually carcass price.
Okay.
So carcass price now $3.60, $3.70 a pound is a really, really big deal. So that actually has a lot of effect. And then the second part is, the other thing that's changed a lot is carcass weights. So we've taken carcass weights up every year by a substantial amount. And when we actually do that, the other thing that's happened is the penalties for overweight carcasses are less, plus what constitutes an overweight carcass is actually a bigger number now as well. And so carcass weight and carcass price become very important factors in the value determination. And so those are things that we've been working on to get updated here. Sure. They're not yet up, but they'll be up fairly soon. And the important part is, this is a really important message. As value of the cattle goes up, on average, value goes up, prices have actually gone up, the premiums for the extras, weaning, vaccination, a really top-notch terminal index, the premiums associated with those go up as well.
Okay.
So I sold a set of calves 3 years ago that we had on the Feeder Profit Calculator. My total of management and genetic value was $12.38. If I do those same set of calves on today's prices, we triple that number. We actually triple that number, and that's because the premiums associated with these traits goes up as the average price of cattle goes up.
Too.
Really important distinction there.
And you referenced that you've used the tool yourself on your operation in
Yes.
Pollock, South Dakota at your ranch. And we've referenced a little bit of using it as a marketing tool.
Yes.
What are some thoughts that you have for producers to use the total relative value, or the output of the calculator, to get that message out to prospective buyers?
First thing I would recommend is, however you plan to sell your calves. So if we sell through a local auction market most of the time. We've also done video auction sales, and we've used some other tools. But if you do that, you want to make sure you're in communication with whoever is helping you market the calves. So we happen to do ours at Mobridge Livestock in Mobridge, South Dakota. We know the people there. They now know what we want and how we want the information presented. They have the big screen, and I actually write out exactly how I want my information presented. And I would encourage ranchers to become much more, I'll call it, assertive in marketing their calves. The reality is if you're bringing a couple hundred calves to an auction market, they're capturing a pretty nice commission on that. And for that commission, my experience is they're very willing to help you do what you think is best. And I think that's a really big deal. And so to work with whoever is helping you market your calves, I'd really recommend that.
And as we continue to promote the Feeder Profit Calculator, as we continue to share the message with local auction barns or video livestock markets, what would be, or what are the benefits of having this type of genetic information, and whether it's a genetic value or management value for those buyers?
So what I would say, first of all, if you think about the motives of the auction market, think about the motives there. Number one, they're interested in number of cattle, number of calves they can actually get, because they're actually commission based. But they're not just interested in that. They're also interested in attracting the highest quality cattle that they can produce. And of course, historically for a long time, that's been a fairly subjective kind of statement. We've made progress in I'd call it the animal health side, with vaccination, with weaning. We've quantified those effects pretty well. We're fairly new on the genetic side. And so I think we're bringing something along that takes a lot of education, takes some effort with, but as you explain it, and particularly for people that have a seed stock interest or seed stock background that understand EPDs, it's not a hard transition to using that EPD information in the feeder cattle themselves.
And Dr. Odde, you mentioned we're seeing record high cattle prices ever in the history of the industry, and which I don't think anybody is complaining about at the moment. But as we look forward into the future, how do producers continue to capture added value or add a premium to their calf crop on sale?
So the first thing I would say is the first thing you have to do is create the value. Then the second thing you have to do is capture the value. And those are almost two separate steps. Okay, so creating the value, it's putting together the right management program, and that's going to vary. Not every ranch is going to wean calves for 45 days. We have lots of large ranches in the West that really don't have the capability to wean calves. They don't have the feed supplies that we'd actually do that. They don't actually have the labor to actually do that. So we recognize that most of those are going to sell calves what we call off the cow. You're going to sell those calves right off the cow. If you've got the capability to background calves, that gives you some added advantage. And I would say in two ways. One is you have the opportunity to make more money just by backgrounding. That's one aspect here. But one of the other things that 4-6 month backgrounding period allows you, it's a risk management tool. So if you really have, and I would use our example, if when the market last fall crashed for a while, okay, if I would have been forced to sell at that point in time because I'm fixed on that, that would have been a bad move. The reality is yesterday, the day before, as Monday, feeder cattle futures got back to the same level they were at the peak last fall.
Wow.
So right now we've recovered a market that we thought we were going to be down maybe $300 or $400 a calf. We were for a few weeks in there, but it started coming back, and the good news is the cash market doesn't directly follow the feeder cattle futures, and so the cash market's been pretty good.
So some of those different management opportunities that producers can input into the calculator would be things like backgrounding calves for a certain period of time, or here are the list of vaccinations, and here's my vaccination protocol.
Absolutely, and also keep this in mind. This is an evolving kind of world. If you go back into the 90s, and I was working in the animal health industry in the 90s, there were very few auction markets that provided any kind of health information, weaning information. It was just not what was going on at that point in time. So that was part of what we worked on a lot when I worked for Pfizer Animal Health in those years. But we've been in a steady evolution where there's more and more in the marketing channels themselves who know that there are buyers that want specific information. And I'll even give you an example of that. When if you go back to the superior livestock language of VAC 24, VAC 34, VAC 45, and VAC Precon to define classes of feeder cattle, what we learned is that once you start quantifying that value, then more people participate in those programs. So I would say right now in auction markets in my part of the world in South Dakota, probably 80% of the calves are being sold with pretty good calf health information and weaning information. That's very different than 20 years ago, very different. So that's been a big change. I think our opportunity now is to do the same thing on the genetic side.
And we'd be in just the infancy, really, of
that's right.
Of
We're very
that.
early in that process is what we actually are. And so people understand that genetics is important, but as of yet, getting the language right, getting the communication right is still a bit of a challenge.
Well, I'm really excited, Dr. Odde, about what the future holds for Feeder Profit Calculator. I think tremendous opportunity as we visit with local sale barns, as we visit with folks of video auction markets. I think we're just at the beginning, as we've said, of sharing that message and willing to solicit some feedback on making improvements and how to provide that educational material.
Exactly. I agree 100%.
Well, thank you for your time today, Dr. Odde.
Okay.
And to download or learn more about the IGS Feeder Profit Calculator, you can visit our website at internationalgeneticsolutions.com.